Everyone to our next Futures talk. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's talk, which is the Accelerator of the Imagination, Dreams, Futures Thinking, and Storytelling. My name is Katie Ventolio, and I'm a project manager with New Silk Roads for our Futures program. Today's talk explores how dreams can act as accelerators of the imagination to envision more optimistic and virtuous scenarios of the future. With our guest, we'll be discussing the intersection between dreams, futures thinking, and storytelling through the lens of his work, which centers on creating new narratives inspired by myths stemming from Africa, the African diaspora, and pre-colonial heritage. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Pierre-Christophe Gam, a polymath artist who trained at the Ecole Nationale Supérieure des Arts Decoratifs in Paris and at the Central St. Martin School in London. In pre-colonial West Africa, the griot acts as the guardian of the memory of the community, which is passed on through initiation songs and stories. As Gam will discuss, he sees his practice as a continuation of this tradition. Today's talk will also be moderated by Arthur Steiner, an art historian who's passionate about the role of arts and culture and digital tech in tackling 21st century challenges. Arthur has also led various programs at HIVOS. He is the co-founder of Digital Earth, a fellowship for artists to imagine radically different digital futures, and the editor of the forthcoming publication, Vertical Atlas. Before we start, a few housekeeping notes. Today's talk will start with a presentation by Pierre-Christophe, followed by a moderated discussion, and then a question and answer section with you, our participants, the audience. For the Q&A, we'll be collecting questions throughout the talk via the chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can submit a question at any point in the talk, so you don't have to wait until the end. We actually encourage you, as you think of questions, to send them in. One small request, we kindly ask that you phrase your question in the form of a question. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and that we will be sharing the video publicly online. Finally, the Futures Talk series is hosted by New Silk Roads, which offers a range of futures thinking programs focused on collectively imagining preferred futures. Grounded in exploration over prediction and possibility over certainty, we work with communities, companies, and organizations alike to imagine what could happen, not just what will happen. We especially look to the lessons of the past to move beyond nostalgia and to use history as a springboard for imagining novel futures. These future talks are supported by the Greenworks program, which is led by HIVOS and funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And now, with no further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker tonight. Thank you.
Can you see me?
Yes, hello.
Okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank everybody at New Silk Road who took part in putting this event together. And thank you as well to everyone from across the world who have joined us today. I'm humbled by the invitation and beyond delighted to share with you some of my thoughts and ideas on the power of the imagination. So, Katie, you can launch the presentation. Yes, you can move to the next page. So, I'm going to start with the following. The secret to reality is that everything is just a dream. And it is only when dreams are seeded onto the infinite soil of our imagination that they can manifest into our world. Before they materialize into the physical realm, ideas already exist. Although they cannot yet be seen through the naked eye, they exist in an alternate cosmic dimension, an oniric land of dreams, within which they're formed, vibrating and expanding in the amniotic liquid of human consciousness. My practice is centered on the exploration of this land of dreams, the cradle of our imagination. Beside nature and the invisible and visible laws of the cosmos, everything that exists around us stems from an idea. The clothes we wear, the house we live in, the car we drive, to the very computers and mobile phone we are using today to connect with one another. Everything that exists in our world today was once an immaterial and invisible thought, which evolved and grew through an inward dialogue, a complex and subtle process of reflective challenges to become a proposition, a convention, or a norm. But what we as individuals and as a society fail to understand is that beside nature, there is no definite truth. What we have been conditioned to see as fixed and intangible norms are in fact arbitrary consensus, co-opted norms. Stories embraced as reality. My father used to say that what matters is not to know if something is real or not, but whether if people believe in it. Because if they do, that idea, whatever it may be, will come to define and shape the perception of the world and therefore influence the way they project themselves into reality. Reality is a moving sea whose waves follow the contours of our imagination. What we believe becomes reality. Therefore, who owns the story owns the present and potentially the future. The project that I'm going to present to you today is currently under development, and it is being designed to act as an accelerator of the imagination. Its intended goal will be to enable the public to regain control of their own story by tapping into the power of the imagination to envision and experience what life could look like in the context of an ideal future, a protopia shaped around our hopes and our dreams. You can move to the next page. So this project is called Toguna. And the process behind it is inspired by an ancient tradition from the Dogon people in Mali. Next page. So Toguna is a traditional meeting place of the Dogon people in Mali in West Africa. The Toguna is the shelter in which the community gathers to discuss and exchange ideas. Through a ritualized process of conversation, it provides a physical, social, and psychological space for open communication. So as Katie mentioned before, my practice is very much more and more inspired by ancient tradition, mainly African tradition, and pre-colonial African tradition. And so this project is very much the culmination of the last 10 years of research. So let me carry on with the presentation. So it is, next page. So the name of the project is called Toguna, the Accelerator of the Imagination. We can go through the presentation, next page. So it's gonna be tricky because I'm using my phone. So Katya has to move the pages for me. Here's a visual. You can move to the next page. So Toguna is a hybrid metaverse art installation fusing AR, VR, film, photography, mixed media culture, and future thinking, designed to facilitate a forum for an innovative conversation on the future of our world. Existing both as a physical and a digital experience, Toguna is built around Nomo, a transformative future workshop, using the social relations of food and storytelling to unleash the power of our imagination towards the envisioning of more virtuous vision of the future. So the starting point for this project really stemmed from, as I started earlier, by really talking about what really defines reality, right? Is reality only defined by what has been created by humans? Or does reality lies elsewhere beyond that? And my argument is that reality, like I was saying earlier, is the reflection of what we believe. And everything starts from the idea, from the imagination. And so that project is very much built upon that. And so this is something that I'm currently developing. We can move to the next page. I think I'm just going to go through the presentation and then I'm going to explain and discuss further. Okay, so this is just a visual and illustration. But what this project is going to be, so it's going to be a project that is going to exist as a physical installation and an immersive installation. The foundation behind it is looking at pre-colonial African tradition, namely the Ifa tradition. So the Ifa tradition is a spiritual divination system from the Yoruba people, which are crossing over Nigeria, Togo, and Benin. And it's a divination system that helps to, make sense of the present, make sense of what is visible, what is invisible, and at the same time, the future. And one of the interesting things as well with the Ifa tradition is that it is built around a binary system. And the binary code is basically what is at the root of the mathematics, what is at the roots of computers today. And so it's a very complex divination system, which act as an epistemologic, paradigm. It helped to make sense of the world and of the universe. And the way it was built was very much defined as a guide for righteous living. And so in this context of envisioning the future, I'm interested in looking at that from that perspective. Okay, so Togona represents the vision of a nature and community-centric future rooted in ancient, so we have to move to the next page, sorry. So Togona represents the vision of a nature and community-centric future rooted in ancient African indigenous knowledge and wisdom. So like I was mentioning, the Ifa tradition, we can move to the next page as well. Here are some references. And so in the course of this project, in the research for this project, I've been traveling extensively across Africa, from Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, Togo, South Africa, Cameroon, and so forth. And during the course of my travel, I've been really trying to get a sense of, so that Ifa tradition I was mentioning earlier, but at the same time as well, looking at ancient ways of living as a possibility for a wisdom that could be used and implemented in the ideal vision of the future, basically. And so here in this mood board, what you can see are images of pre-colonial African architecture and just a series of images that have been in the back of my mind as I've been developing this project. You can go down, the future workshop, next page. And so one of the ways that I've been building up this project was through a series of workshops. And so this workshop were called Future Workshop, and I've been organizing them across Africa. So I started in Kenya in the context of the 2019 African Crossroad Gathering in Mombasa. And then it continued in Ghana. And so let me read. So an archive of dreams, the vision of Togona is developed through a series of future workshops, composed in equal representations of gender and socioeconomic backgrounds. The workshop provides an open and inclusive space for ideation, whilst opening a larger conversation around dreams as the foundation upon which reality is manifested. 320 thinkers, dreamers, and doers from the world of art, design, technology, science, agriculture, religions, and business have already taken part across Africa. So you can go to the next page. And here you can see there is the model of the structure that was built specifically for the workshop that took place in Mombasa in Kenya. And if you go to the next page again, yeah, you see it. And so the design of the space was thought from the idea of a dream lounge, a tent, and as if this was a tent in the Sahara. And in this context, I acted as a storyteller, as a griot. And the workshop was centered around a fictitious myth of creation. So I imagine a new way of explaining the creation of the world. So that myth was inspired strongly from the Ifa tradition, which I mentioned earlier. But what was interesting for the myth is that it helped the participant to unlock the perception of reality and start envisioning new possibilities beyond the internalized limitation of our present time. And so it started through stories, and then you can see in the images, people started to interact, share the dream, share the vision. And really the question that was asked to them was not, because usually when you ask someone, what do you want? Most of us have been conditioned to answer from the perspective of sharing. The way we think about what we want is based on what we believe we are possible to achieve. And so in that context, our space, the way we have internalized our position in the world, in our context, right? And so here it's about really challenging all of these preconceived notions and really helping people to not consider what they want based on what they believe they can have, but really based on how they would like reality to be formed around them, right? And so the question that were asked was looking at interpersonal relationship, family dynamic, food production, spirituality, our relationship with natures and so forth. And so from all of this, of all of the answers that were, raised and ideas that emerged in context of this workshop, these are the ones that I've used in order to shape the, Toguna installation. So we can move to the next, and I think that's the last page, right? And so what this installation is going to be, so it's going to be, so one thing I have to mention is that the installation has been co-funded by Meta and by Unity. Through the Unity for Humanity grant. And so this is going to be an installation that will have two parts. There's going to be a physical part of the installation and a digital part. And through the physical part, what the public would be able to experience would be the vision of an African family in 50 years away from now, so in 2070. This family is not located specifically in the continent, but the idea is that they're from Yoruba tradition. So this could be in Nigeria, for example. And the space is going to be built looking at the Yoruba courtyard structure. And so the way houses are built traditionally in West Africa, they're built around an open courtyard. And the idea of the open courtyard is that you don't have just one unit for the family, but the house is divided between a series of smaller units, and each occupies specific functions, and members of the closer family and the extended family are spread around. And so it creates an interesting dialogue between private, public space, but as well close and extended family. And so that's the way the space is going to be built for the exhibition. And what you will see is that there's going to be 5 units, and each of these units will explore 5 fundamental questions. And so this question will be: how will we play? How will we dream? How will we love? How will we eat? And how we play, love, pray, eat, and dream in the future. And so that's what will be explored through each of these units. And there's going to be a mix of photography, painting, collage, and augmented reality. And so as the public will move in front of each of these units, they will get to see different scenarios of the outcome of what this will look like in that ideal future. And again, that future will be based on the summary of all of the workshop that I've been doing over the last 2 years. In the center of the space, there's going to be an open space, an island. And within this island, I'm going to be hosting that very same workshop that took place here. And the second part of that workshop was a series of dining workshop, which was around the same idea, but here I was using food as a tool to activate the participation of the public. And so this is what we're going to be doing in the context of the exhibition. So in the evening, we'll have an immersive workshop with a limited number of guests. And following a ritual, they will themselves be able to take part in this process of ideation. So this will be for the public part, the physical part of the installation. And then there's going to be the online part. And so online, what you're going to have is going to be a fully immersive space, dream world. And so here, the public will be able to, using VR headset, they will be able to enter this house online and to experience the house as if they were themselves, members of that family. So they'll be able to move through the courtyard to see the activity within the different units, so to see the different scenarios. And they will be able to register to take part to that same workshop that will be taking place physically in the context of the physical installation. Then this will be made open to people from across the world. And so they will be themselves as well able to register and to take part of the workshop. And so the way this is thought about is that the initial workshop, I'll be the one hosting them, but eventually I'm interested to opening, the hosting of the workshop to other thinkers, artists from across the world, and for them to bring as well a new audience and a new conversation. So that's the way the installation is going to be. So there's going to be a physical part and an online part. Another aspect that's going to be very important is that, because like I mentioned, the name of the installation is called Toguna. And Toguna is a space for conversation. That's essentially what it is. And so the way I've conceived it is that the visuals and the kind of visual display that people will be able to experience, it will serve to me as a kind of horizon landscape to support the activation of the actual workshop. So within the physical and the online experience, that dream-like, narrative vision really is being designed in order to help facilitated to help facilitate, people participation and full immersion into the workshop. Another aspect that will be done, and that was just as important, is that each of the dreams that will be collected will be utilized within a dedicated website. And so that website will serve as an archive of dreams. And so there will be the dreams that have already been collected over the last 2 years, but there will be the new dreams that will emerge in the context of these workshops. And so these dreams will then be augmented by podcast, essays, illustration, film, and I'm going to, commission a series of artists from across the world to participate to that. And to me is that I want this dream, like I was mentioning earlier, to act as an archive of dreams, but at the same time, because I think the way we are being pushed right now, I think coming out of COVID, the kind of pressure and the stress that we went through COVID, now we just, our nose is finally getting out, and now we're transitioning into the war. So there's been a lot of very, stress-filled kind of, very stressful, last 2 years, let's say. And at the same time, a lot of things have been accelerated around our life in terms of, the way technology has been spread around, has become more immersive in our life. A lot of things have been done, but the way these things are done, it's done in a way as if, as individual, we have no control on our reality, and definitely we have no control on our future. And the way when you have conversation, there are fundamental conversation questions that are being raised, let's say by, issues of global warming, issues of AI. AI has positive things, but as well, there's question in regards to privacy. There's a lot of issues in our society, the way things are being accelerated in an exponential fashion. But I think there are very few spaces where we can meaningfully take pause and reflect and consider where we are going as a society and whether we want to go in that direction or not. And I think today the Conversation on the Future is mainly essentially driven by Silicon Valley and hedge fund managers. And the issue of it is that the main focus for these people is profit margin, right? So they want to be scalable. And the reason why I actually call the project the Accelerator of the Imagination is that in the kind of tech world, we have these things that you call an incubator, which is a space where you take an initial idea and you develop it, you nurture it, you challenge it, that it becomes more reflective, resilient, agile, and then you accelerate it. And the acceleration process is when you open it to investors. And the idea is that they invest in ideas that can be scalable, that the founder can potentially exist, make a lot of money, and move on to a next project, right? And here, my take is that capitalistic driven vision of society is the one that is in many ways shaping technology, and technology is framing the way we see a project ourselves in the world. But we fail to recognize that technology is being programmed. It's not something that stems out of nature, right? It's something that we as individual program. And the way we program technology is based on the vision of what we believe is possible in the world, and the way we see ourselves and our place in reality. And so the idea of this project is really to create a space where individuals will be able to reconsider the position in the world, the place in the world. And like I was saying earlier, is that I believe that the who owns the story owns the future. And so in many ways, this project is to act as an accelerator of the imagination so that individuals will be able to own their own story and hopefully define our own future. This is it. So if you have any question, I am more than happy to.
Thank you very much. That was really inspiring and that was really powerful. Thanks so much for the talk. There are questions from the audience, but first of all, I have a few questions for you, and then we can move to the audience. But thanks so much for this. I know your work. I participated in the workshops in Mombasa, and it's great to be here with you and talk about your practice. Maybe as a first question, because that's something I'm also myself as an art historian always very interested in, is the aesthetic dimension of your work and of your practice. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the maybe the aesthetics, the colors, the visuals, but maybe also taste is also an important element in your work. It's also related somehow to aesthetics, and of course the visuals, and how they connect to your to your practice.
Yes. So I think one of the things I must mention is that I'm trained as an architect. This is my first, this is what I went to study in design school. And so I'm very much interested in the idea of space, but the idea of space, not purely from a place of aesthetic, but really space as an environment within life happen, right? And so at the same time that I was studying architecture in France, I was very much interested in sociology. And I was very much, and to me, sociology was, because I started to consider that every time when one think about the memory, that memory is connected to a specific space. And so the way we come to design space becomes essential, because this is the theater through which people are going to perform their life with one another. And so when it moves then to kind of visual narratives, I'm very much interested in the idea of total art. And total art is a kind of art experience that touch upon all of the senses. So the sight, the touch, the smell, the taste, and really create this kind of, overwhelming of emotion and sensation, and kind of like lifelike, experience. And I think that's why it was actually kind of makes a lot of sense for me to explore the metaverse, world. In terms of the specific colors and visual narrative that I use for different projects, and I think my art practice really started over the last 10 years, because before that I was mostly doing work as a creative director or designer, is that I very much tap into a kind of visual language that, there are a mix of, a lot of my work, if you see, is that you'll see there's a lot of collage that I've been using. So I'll be, for example, looking at, ancient archive photography from Africa. And this is pictures from like late 1900s, early 20th century. And I'll be modifying them to create tapestry and visual landscape. So the architecture part is that I think I built my work a lot around space. So I create kind of digital space structured. I mix photography with it. So I take feed photos that I put into it. There's drawings as well. So there's a lot of different techniques that I put into it. So there's not so much one particular technique, but the way I see this technique is that they all help to convey a specific emotion and story. And in terms of the color, and in terms of the shape, I think this idea of dream and this idea of kind of space in which you can just lose yourself is very much something that I'm interested in. And so when I design the colors that I use, the shape that I use, I actually design a lot into creating, visual narrative that can trigger that feeling within myself. And hopefully if they do it for me, they will do it for others.
Thanks, beautiful. Wow. One other question that I have, and what fascinated me about your talk is, you're talking about the metaverse, right? And like how big tech is almost, like stealing how we imagine our futures, or it's determining how we imagine our futures. And of course that's a very commercial also, like enterprise. And then you mentioned, the IFA tradition and the divination system that they're using. And what struck me is that you said that is also based on binary code. So it's also based on almost like the same fundamentals as big tech, right? How could you tell a bit more about this divination system and how it works, and in a way how it maybe offers, like something that can maybe counter this metaverse commercial visions, from within, in a way, with this system that they're using.
I think so. I'll answer in two parts. So before talking about IFA, I will talk about the context in which we are right now. I think everybody has heard about the Cambridge Analytica scandal a few years back, right? And what emerged in the context of the scandal was that today, in terms of the level of, and I think even the whole Francis Haugen, whistleblower for Facebook, is that in terms of the technology that exists online, and this is basically through I think the word that he uses is surveillance economy. So the idea is that the online economy is based on the captation of users' data. And so these data are used, analyzed to understand people's behavior patterns. So what we do, but as well what we don't do, and understand as well how we think, how we feel, etc. And then these informations are sold to advertiser to craft specific messages in order for us to move us into buying action, right? So behavioral modification. But the thing is that the level of data that are accumulated upon each and every one of us is so strong now that we can even influence people into specific behavior, into specific worldview. I mean, it's propaganda, I guess, which has always existed. So there's nothing new. I think it existed with church, with education, with television, marketing, advertising, Hitler, in political context, dictatorship, it has always existed. But I think now the level and the kind of immersive way through which you can manipulate someone, I think it's unheard in human history. We all heard stories as well of troll farm and so forth. So it's in terms of the challenges, it really starts questioning the very idea of people agency and people being able to make decisions by themselves. And so if we consider that the story are the roots of the way we see reality, right? I mentioned earlier a quote, something that my father used to say, that in the 90s in France, there was this big moment where everybody was talking about sect. So I think in English, you'll say cult. And I think you had this whole new age movement from the 60s and in the 80s, 90s. A lot of them now just evolved into just pure cult. And one I was asking my dad, because there was one cult that was very prominent in France and people used to talk about it a lot in the media. And I asked my father, but is it real? And my father's answer was that it's irrelevant whether to know if something is real. Well, only what matters is that do people believe in it or not? Because when you believe in something, this comes to define the way you see yourself, the way you look at the world, and the way then you then project yourself into reality, right? And so if you're able to control and shape and organize and define stories globally, because now, this platform now reach people across the world globally and shape our perception of reality, it means that you have the real world, and then as in the Matrix, you have like an overlay that will be designed by someone else. And this will come to determine the way you see yourself and project yourself in the world. And so to me, I think that, and that's a fundamental question. And I think it's something that we are supporting as well by a buying pattern, but I think it's mostly because very few people fully understand that the kind of power that exists now in terms of, the tech world, that this new space in that we are inhabiting. Going back to IFA, I'm very much interested in, because, one of the things as well I would argue is that, a lot of the time when people consider things about change, you think about that you have to answer or react to something that exists in the world. And my proposition and my argument is that, on the contrary, instead of just looking at someone's proposition, which is an arbitrary convention, like norm, and just trying to challenge and put all of your intellect, all of your imagination, all of your might into challenging that, my argument is that we will be more effective by taking that energy and taking that power and that agency into imagining system more perfectly crafted and designed around our fundamental needs. And in that exploration, I argue that, there is this thing that exists in the real world, but that is the sum of our dreams, of our stories and imagination that manifest itself into reality. But then I argue that there is this thing that exists beyond, and that is the actual the reality. And so in that process of envisioning, what, the power of our imagination, but as well the possibilities of the future, I thought that it was important as well to consider how do we apprehend and relate to the natural world. And one of the things that I found fascinating in the Ifa tradition, and mostly with West African tradition, but you have other traditions in the world that are very much like that. I think the Shintoist tradition is this idea that what defines humans is, let's say in the capitalist context, we all have been conditioned to be isolated. So before, people used to be part of community, they used to be part of village, they used to be part of extended family. And more, we are conditioned to be part of ourselves and the things we buy, right? Because then you can segment populations, and everybody can buy different things, and we identify ourselves, relate ourselves in the world based on our conception power, our ability to buy more and more goods. And what I'm interested in is that how, if you consider how societies, communities were connected and relating with each other before that. I'm not talking about trade, that's something else, but I'm really talking about capitalism as an idea and as a global force, global capitalism. And if you look as well, the way we related with each other, but as well the way we're relating with nature, with the natural world as a whole. And so when I look at the Ifa tradition, what fascinates me is this idea. I mean, I think one of the words that people talk about it is a pagan tradition, but it's much more complex than that. The first thing is that, which is common to the tradition, is this idea that human life that defines us, the life that defines us is a direct emanation of God. And this is the thing that you see across all living forms. So the tree, the plants, the animals, etc. And, we see ourselves as removed from the natural world. But in this understanding is that the same way our body is an ecosystem and is a fully connected organism, the whole world and the whole universe is an organism, is a living organism. And then us as human beings, we are nothing than just a part of it. That's it. And we're all being filled and animated by the same fundamental living force that permeates across all things. And so that's the starting point. And the more I started then to learn and question, and I'm still learning, I'm no expert in the Ifa tradition, to learn and consider it, I started to realize that there was a very powerful and beautiful way to really explain. And actually it's it's very science-like, science-like, let's say, because when I talk about the creation of the world, the creation of human life, the egg, they talk about things that are very much connected to the idea of the DNA. It's just a really fascinating way of looking at society and the world. And so I felt that, as we move into, because then the question becomes, if you create reality, right? The issue is that then you can build reality based on illusions. Like you have an illusion, and then you're going to build on top of that illusion, and then you build on top of that illusion. And I think the fundamental exercise is to try to really question things from a place of something that would be more fundamental, and try like a fundamental truth. And then from that perspective, then bring people to envision and consider the rest based on their own, gravitational force, let's say.
Wow, thanks so much for this this elaborate answer. This is beautiful, and I would love to. You already answered my other question actually about the role of community and collective, and actually now I also realize it's all about indeed this collective dreaming and pushing back this individual idea of the individual dream, and also this like connected maybe to Silicon Valley, etc. So that's very interesting, and to the accelerators and incubators. So that's quite interesting. I'm going to move to the questions from the audience. So Katie is sending me the questions. Maybe the first one is about giving your workshop at multiple locations. Do you have any observations about the role of place and history in each location impacted the imagining of your participants? So the question is about how does this play out in different places where you have been doing this?
Yeah, because I think in every time, for example, even in the context of the one in Bassa, so it was all happening, in this tent overlooking the Indian Ocean. I think the context was, prone to dreamscape, I think. But at the same time, because it was a diverse audience, so everybody came with their own story, their own, and basically, we all have different stories that have been told to us from our family, from our society, from our context, historical, present, and so forth. And so each of that plays a part into the ability of someone to take part into that exercise. And I think one of the things that I noticed in that context is that's why it's really about creating an immersive experience, because then it's like basically seeing it as a ritual. And the same way that in the past we used to have, we still have really, traditional rituals in church, in different spiritual communities. I very much build the experience as a performance, but very much as a ritual, so that the different steps will help the participant to, unlock, open, and, unleash the imagination to be fully accessible. One of the things that I noticed though is that, when you ask someone, what do you want? It's actually a more challenging question than one may think. It's a more challenging question because many of us have never been used to consider our next step based on what we fundamentally want. We consider our next step based on what we believe is available, what we believe is within reach, and what we believe will provide us the highest amount of security and maybe reward, right? But it's based on options that are designed and presented by others. So it really comes from something that is fundamentally rooted into yourself. And we are conditioned to see it as, practicalism, practicalism, and then, growing up and being wise and so forth. But it's just compromises that we do with ourselves. And in the context of the workshop, I started to realize that some people were very much challenged by the experience. And so the two kind of profile I saw, they were most of everybody was able to unlock and really take part, but there were some people. There was two examples. One person, for example, needed to really highlight issues in the world in order to think about what he wanted. So he had to raise issue. There is this problem in the world, and therefore I think we should do that. And I was like, but this is beyond that. Forget about this. This is created. So we're not going to think about something that has been created. Let's think about how would you create your own reality, and how would it look like? And it took a lot of back and forth for him to be able to fully jump into that. Another person felt the need to criticize other people's proposition. And I started to realize that actually stemmed from a place of insecurity. Because, and I think as well, I've been raised in France. One of the things I noticed as well is that, I think in the Western world, I'm generalizing, but loosely, is that you are conditioned to never fully express your inner thoughts in a strange way. So people think that we express ourselves a lot, but not so much. I think you express yourself based on, I believe I would say it as like marketing archetype that exists in society. Characters and roles in terms of lifestyle, and lifestyle are connected to what you can buy, right? So lifestyle are connected to consumption patterns. But beyond that, beyond who you fundamentally are, etc., it becomes very challenging for us to be able to have conversation in that level, because it presented as a space that is unsafe. And if you explore that, then you are exposing weaknesses. And I think what I noticed, especially in the context of doing the workshop in Africa, I'm generalizing, but is that there was an ability for people to step from something that would be rational and very quickly into something that would be fully abstract. So pure abstraction. And it was very easy for them to just jump into, so we're here, we're sitting down. This is the idea. This is the scope. This is the frame. We started questioning here. Now let's explore that. And people were going even further than I was going. And then I found myself catching up.
Wow.
And so going back to your question, I think the space and the context is very important to facilitate that experience. Everybody as well can do it, of course. But I think because of our context and because in the way that we've been socialized, we all have, let's say we may come into it, the idea of exploring your thoughts. And I think as well, the idea of sharing it publicly, some people may see it as something that will be challenging. And so that's why then in my role as a host, I have to really, create open space for the experience.
Amazing. I have one other question, a critical question. It's about, you talk about creating your own reality and what you believe can become the reality. Mm-hmm. How do objective realities, quote unquote, like, for example, a disease, mm-hmm. feature in your point of view? Like, so how do you deal with this kind of, realities like diseases, and within this worldview that you can create your own reality?
Mm-hmm. So I think I would say that that's not really feature in it. Not that I ignore it, but I think because here I'm really, I think there's always this moment when we have to consider things from the moment where, we have the accident, we are sick, we are struggling, etc. There's all of this that maybe I think the person called it as practical reality from when we reach that moment of challenges. But I think very often before that moment happens, there is all of this other time that is fully available where instead of thinking about what we actually want, we dedicate ourselves to think anxiously about what may happen bad, right? And so we spend a lot of time trying to consider what may happen bad instead of considering what we actually want and being fully present in the moment. And so in the context of the workshop, and I think it's important to say is that I'm not there to, to push my worldview on people. It's not that, but it's just about really creating a space for one moment where we can start thinking about things, not, this idea of the glass half full and half empty. And we can start thinking, okay, there is this, there is that, there's this possibility, there's that, right? But then let's think about, the roots of disease, let's say, right? Disease sometimes are a result of our environment, our lifestyle, how we eat, the way we live, the absence of physical activity, the places in which we live and so forth, right? And so then if you consider the thing, not just from the place of the problem, you start considering things from the foundation, from inception, then maybe you can start imagining situation, context, ways of living that will make the possibility of this disease happening maybe less likely, right? And so to me, I think this is what is interesting. It's not just for us to be able to buy into solution, but from the place of buying, commodities, right? Commodified solutions, but really creating a space and using art and stories in that context for that, where we can start ideating new ways of living, but that are very much centered on our agency, our individual and collective agencies.
Beautiful. Thank you for that answer. That's great. We have a lot of other questions, but I take one more, which is the questions. It's actually a question about something we didn't talk about yet. It's about crypto and NFTs. What's your view on creative crypto and NFTs projects? How much will Tokuna Metaverse be related to this world?
I think, there is this whole hype now on NFT. And you see these spams every day on your IG where people are trying to sell you NFTs. I think there's the hype, but I think as well behind that, there's the very valid technology of blockchain. And it's true that blockchain as a technology is, it offers amazing possibilities. I was talking about the web 2 now that we are into right now, which is about monopolies and control and exploitation. And I think the idea behind web 3 would be imagining a space where we all be on the internet, but we'll be in control and owner of our own data, of our own content, and we'll be then sharing it with one another. And I think NFT in the context, if you bring it back then to context of artwork online, it's a way to be able to authenticate ownership, and then to control the movement and the transaction of a specific artwork in the digital space, which is something that did not exist before NFT in that context, right? And so blockchain technology then allows that to have transparency and then being able to see movement of artwork. Because if you think of it, when we go online, we spend time on Facebook, Instagram, we create content, we put content, that content is being monetized in so many different ways, but the creator of that content is not rewarded, right? On top of that, is being exploited, manipulated. And so I think, and blockchain in that context is definitely the way. So it's something that is definitely worthy of being explored. I think this craze now going to when people are buying little panda and bear, cartoons, and they spend $1 million on it. I think eventually, I assume this is going to fade because it's not rooted. I think it's a hype, but then it's just like speculation. I'm like I was going to say, I'm not hitting on anybody's hustle. If it works for them, I think great. But that's not something that I'm particularly inspired. I'm inspired by the technology, the possibilities of NFT for sure. In the context of the specific project, so I'm going to use NFT. But I'm going to use NFT purely because of the authentication. Because one of the things I didn't mention is that So once the world will be built digitally, so this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So there's going to be the first part, chapter 1, which is going to be that first house. But then I'm looking then to build, the way I see it is that will be a university, maybe not university, like a larger Tuguna, but a university of wisdom, right? And so I'm interested in really, because, I don't know if people online have been able to take part in a VR chat experience, social VR, and the way that you're able to engage and connect with someone across the world. And now we are speaking through, our screens. But I think if you had a headset, we'll feel as if we're in the same space, and it creates a level of immersion and connectivity that is, something to be appreciated. And so I'm interested in actually building a bigger space and adding layers across throughout times. And so each of the assets within that space will be minted. So will be NFT in that context. And so, yeah, so I'm definitely considering NFT for the project. And I think there is definitely value in the blockchain for sure. And one of the things that I argue, and I think when I consider the idea of the future, I think the way that now we've all have been conditioned to be pure consumers, meaning that things, you see issues happen with our cereal, with our food, the context of COVID, now potential, shortage of cereals now because of the war with Ukraine and Russia, is that I really believe that eventually, even when you consider the context of, sustainability, global warming, that, the way I see the future is that we'll bring production closer to home, right? So everything will be more local. So our production of food, our production of energy, things will be more localized. And instead of being part of a larger grid monopoly, so people will be able to generate, resources and energy within smaller grid, and we'll be able to share the surplus with each other. So this kind of individual nucleus that are connected to a larger network. And at the same time as well, I believe that if that future is supposed to work, so future connected to blockchain and NFT, is that we all must become programmers and developers. That's what I believe. It's the idea of us just receiving products that are fully programmed, and us being only the user, I think at some point is going to become obsolete. And I really see the idea that I'm exploring is really this idea. That's something that will be part of the project. The next phase is that really imagining if everybody was fluent in programming, and we all have our own data bank, like a server at home, connecting data. And the companies will only just produce the hardware. So they only just produce the interface. But then it's your duty when you receive it to then feed your data with your own particular needs, profile, desire, etc. And for you then to program the tool. So our phone will come just as a set of possibilities, and then it becomes our responsibility to program it and to define how it's going to perform to real extents and so forth.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Thanks. Wow. Maybe the new Silk Road team also has to consider moving to the metaverse and doing the future talks there. Thanks so much for the last answer. We are really out of time, I'm afraid. So I have just one last question that we ask every guest here, and that's the question: if you can recommend any movies, artworks, books, podcasts, something for the people in the community that they can read or listen to and get inspiration. So do you have like maybe 3 or 1 or 2 or 3, because we're really out of time, tips?
Okay. So I think in terms of reading, there is a Russian writer called Fyodor Dostoevsky, and the book is The Karamazov Brothers. This is my favorite book of all time. And I could explain in length why, but I think what I like about it is really the way that they explore the human mind and the depths of the human soul and mind and our contradiction and so forth. It's fascinating. In terms of another book, there's another book that I've been reading over the last few months, and it's called A Fistful of Shells. And it's a book that has been written by an English historian. Unfortunately, I don't have his name in mind, but it's a book that looks at the trade routes and the trade patterns across Africa in pre-colonial time. So it was like middle age onward. There's another book that called African Dominion. As well, I don't have the name of it, unfortunately. But that's a book that talks about something, but in more in depth, in more details. And so what it's done is that it looked at books from Arabic historian. So this is like 600 BC AC, 600 after Christ, like, you know, Middle Age. And it talks about, you know, life across West Africa. So this is some of the books that I've been exploring at the moment. In terms of film, I think my favorite movie so far, and there's a few. I think I would say Rashomon, Japanese book. I think the name is Kurosawa, the director. Another movie would be The Machinist with Christian Bale. And I think I love this book as well because it's very much a book about the psychology of the mind. And in this movie, Christian Bale is riddled by guilt, and it's fascinating to see. So yeah.
Wow.
Psychological work and the stories.
Thanks so much for this. I'm gonna hand over again to Katie, but thanks so much for this super inspiring evening. And yeah, I hand over to Katie.
Great, thank you everyone. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Pierre-Christophe. So with that, we've finished up our Futures Talk for today. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us. We will be posting the recording of this online on our social media and our website, and please stay tuned for upcoming Futures Talks. And we wish you all a nice morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you're joining us from the world. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.